Very good morning, everyone. Happy to be back among lots of private equity investors, my old crowd, if you will. And obviously, we're living in interesting times, so I'll do my best to highlight some themes that hopefully will be insightful for all of us. Obviously, we get invited to speak at conferences like this to tell the audience what you want to hear. So I'll do plenty of that, but I might also share a few things which maybe we prefer not to hear, but I think it's important that we keep an eye on certain things which, maybe with rising opportunity also comes rising risks. So I just wanted to address some of those as well. Now, this conference is obviously about ASEAN, right, Southeast Asia, and made in Southeast Asia until 2025, future of fundraising. So I apologize, my slides tend to be more about Indonesia, which of course is 40% or thereabouts of ASEAN's economy. But I think a lot of the trends that I will highlight apply across the board to the whole of ASEAN. And I'll also talk about a few things for which I don't have slides, but hopefully will be relevant to our thinking as we plot investing in ASEAN over the next 10, 15 years. So if we go to the first slide, slide number 2. Is it? Are we on? Slide number 2. Oh, there we go. So 2 years ago, 2017, Indonesia hit a important milestone, which is that we became only the number 16 country in human history to cross $1 trillion per year GDP. Right? There's only 16 countries, even though there'll be more in years to come. Right? It'll take a while. So at nominal US dollar exchange rates, we're now a $1 trillion economy, right? $1 trillion per year economy, or what we like to call, we're now members of the $1 trillion club. Going straight to the, next slide. I really like this chart because it really shows the composition of the $2.7 trillion per year or so ASEAN economy, right? So as I mentioned, Indonesia is maybe around 40% of ASEAN's economy, but we're more than double the size of the second largest one, which is Thailand at 455 billion, right? And with apologies to any Vietnam-focused funds in the audience, Vietnam, even though to be congratulated for their hugely successful reforms, joining as a founding member of TPP and setting up trade agreements with the European Union, and Vietnam is a fantastic success story, but as yet they're less than a quarter the size of Indonesia's economy, right? As with most of us in life, right? A lot of times our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses. So Vietnam's tremendous success with exports, attracting FDI from the likes of Samsung, which now exports by itself like $40 billion per year out of Vietnam every year. It's a two-edged sword. It can leave the economy dangerously exposed to a single growth engine. The nice thing about Indonesia as a very large economy is it is very diversified, right? As I'll point out in other slides to come. Just a little bit more on Indonesia. In the markets, like in politics, memories are very short. So many of us have forgotten the very precarious conditions that were prevalent when President Jokowi, administration came into office in 2014, we were going into, I believe, our fourth straight year of decelerating economic growth. Um, we had just survived the first of the Federal Reserve taper tantrums, and there was more to come, right? But as you see from the top left-hand corner, and then also from the top right-hand corner of the slide, the government of Indonesia has successfully executed a turnaround, right? Basically arresting the deceleration in the economy and engineering, albeit a gradual rebound in economic growth. In my view, it's a very sustainable and steady as she goes kind of economic rebound. Now, one thing which I'll touch on a bit later in my talk, what makes me even more happy than the rebound in the GDP growth is actually continuing improvements in our social indicators, right? So what you see from this slide is we've got a continuing, gradual, and sustainable decline in things like poverty rates, unemployment rates, and inequality indicators. And I think a lot of that has to do with the president's focus on building infrastructure, especially outside Java. So a lot of areas which were previously very neglected had incredible poverty, got a huge fiscal injection of building and construction programs. And a lot of the outlying areas arguably benefited the most from the drastically improved connectivity from the infrastructure like airports, toll roads, seaports, and the like. And that is leading to a reduction in inequality in Indonesia. Now, moving right along, obviously, like most other developing economies, the structure of our economy is changing. We watch the trade wars with a certain amount of bemusement because, frankly, a lot of times trade wars and trade tensions arise over what we call the merchandise trade deficit, right, or merchandise trade, when in reality, the vast bulk of our economies are now in the services sector, right? So, for example, the U.S. economy is actually like 80 to 85% services, and 15% everything else, like agriculture, manufacturing, and the like. And yet, those are the ones that politicians like to, get into big, fights over. Similarly with Indonesia, right now we're still dominated by agriculture, commodities like mining, and of course also manufacturing. But if you really delve into the figures, those sectors which are growing by double digits are almost entirely services sectors, right? And this might be an indication of where the investing opportunity might be in the next 10 to 15 years. Obviously, we're all familiar with the e-commerce boom and the digital economy boom, and that's leading to double-digit growth in telecom services, IT, and the like. I'll get a bit more into the booming tourism and lifestyle industry. And I think those two are pulling along lots of other supporting services, supporting industries like business services, medical services, vocational training, education services, and the like. But again, this chart, I like it because it clearly shows that the sectors that are growing by double digits are almost entirely service sectors. So while the economy is growing 5% per year, now approaching 5.2, 5.3, things like telecoms, technology, logistics, e-commerce are growing 10, 12, 14, sometimes 18, 24, 27% per year. Now, to get a bit more into the lifestyle and tourism sector, yeah. So we believe that this is actually the emerging growth engine of not only the Indonesian economy, but also the ASEAN economy, right? As President Jokowi has pointed out, Never mind Brexit, never mind the political circus that takes place in many capitals around the world these days. Actually, the most important thing happening in the world right now is the continuing rise of hundreds of millions of people around the world into what we call the global middle class. Right? Again, we sort of stopped talking about it a few years ago as we got busy with Brexit and Mr. Trump and many other things. But this is genuinely still the most significant driver of economic growth in the world. And as President Jokowi of Indonesia has pointed out, actually the main thing that differentiates middle class from working class is just one thing, and that's lifestyle, right? What we call the middle class lifestyle. We believe we see it in the tourism numbers. Again, I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers, but if you do a bit of research, even just Google it, right? Take the phenomenon of the Chinese tourist. In just 7 years, arguably, China's gone from a few million tourists per year, outbound visits per year, to today 250 million outbound tourism trips per year, and they're spending something like 300 to 400 billion dollars per year around the world, right? We've seen it in obviously Thailand. There's one place in northern Indonesia, Manado, where over the last 5 years, in just 5 years, the number of Chinese tourists to Manado went from 12,000 per year to 180,000 per year. So 15-fold increase in just 5 years. Right? Now, the other thing, of course, which we're intimately familiar with is the e-commerce and digital economy revolution. Again, don't worry, we'll share these materials with all of you freely via the conference organizers. But it's really genuinely a huge driver of FDI, of investment, of productivity gains, employment, income gains, and the like. And happily, Southeast Asia is in good shape. We've got probably more unicorns in just Indonesia than there is in the entirety of the European Union, right? And in fact, the capital inflow into the e-commerce and digital economy in Indonesia has become so large, again, similar to the tourism boom from China, in a mere 4 or 5 years, capital inflow into Indonesia has gone from a trickle to today, in my personal estimate, accounting for between 15 and 20% of our entire annual FDI, right? So, sorry, just back to tourism. These are all the positive trends that will probably inform our investing strategies over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Inevitably, these explosive growth opportunities will also bring plenty of growing pains. Yeah. Again, I apologize, I didn't have time to put together slides for this, but the tourism boom comes with a dark side, obviously. Just in 2018, the Philippine government, President Duterte, shut down the island of Boracay, originally temporarily and now permanently, because of pollution and coral destruction and what have you, which I strongly agree with that decision. Also last year, the Thai government shut down Maya Bay, where they shot that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Beach, right? But Thailand is, I would argue, approaching the upper bound of their tourism capacity. They're now at like 45 to 50 million inbound tourism visits per year. Their entire population is 70 million, right? And tourism, happily for us who are wanting to create jobs and raise incomes, is a very labor-intensive industry. But, with 70 million population and a rapidly aging demographic, plus environmental stresses, Thailand is probably approaching the limit of how big its tourism industry can get. My estimate is they'll top out at about 55 to 60 million visits per year. What does it mean? There's going to be spillover to the rest of ASEAN, right? So even Bali is probably getting maxed out. That's why President Jokowi, 4.5 years ago when he took office, launched a program that we call 10 New Bali, right? Now, it took 30 years for Bali to go from obscurity to a global brand to the point where, when I go around the world, people now ask me, oh, Indonesia, that's where you're from. Is that somewhere close to Bali, right? So, it will take a few decades for Komodo and, Wakatobi or Belitung and other places to reach the same status. But again, environmental pressure, sheer demand, the continuing rise of those middle class people in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions, we believe will continue driving this sector. Of course, there's also social media, right? We believe that social media is, so between the social media and the shift to the on-demand economy, Uber, Grab, Gojek, we see a shift in the pattern of consumption from owning things, right, material possession, to spending more of your money on experiences in that endless pursuit for the perfect Instagrammable moment, right? So we're going to spend less and less of our money on Hermes bags and Chanel bags. We'll probably go to an app like rent a Hermes, rent a Chanel, right? And we'll spend more of our money on, outings to Wakatobi or Chiang Mai or Boracay, with friends, hunting for the maximum number of likes and followers by posting, food porn, beautiful sunsets and the like to social media. Now, risks and opportunities in ASEAN over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So the opportunities, what makes me very, very comfortable and very, very optimistic about ASEAN. We are really on the forefront of this technological revolution. Again, apologies I didn't have time to put together some slides, but some of you might be aware that Singapore, for example, is already operating a drone delivery network to deliver supplies from the land to the dozens of cargo ships that are parked in the Straits of Malacca, right? So again, you can Google it, but apparently it saves like 40 to 60% of cost to deliver, food, medicine, supplies, whatever, to crews parked on these cargo ships via airborne autonomous drone rather than via crewed speedboats. And then other things, a great company from Silicon Valley called Zipline is starting its first program in Indonesia. And what they do is they deliver medical supplies to remote regions using drone aircraft, right? Fully electric, can be recharged using solar panels. And again, Indonesia, like Philippines or Myanmar, what have you, very spread out countries with poor infrastructure that we're still developing. But again, Industry 4.0 technologies with autonomous or semi-autonomous drones, right, can fly over all the jungles, the mud, the rivers, and actually deliver, certainly medical supplies and critical supplies at maybe 10% of the cost of delivering them by trucks over muddy roads and driven by humans. The risks that I see, and this takes me back to the social indicators that I proudly displayed earlier. I predict that this technological revolution, right, will become extremely polarizing. Yeah. So around the world, we're already struggling with polarization and, you know, people on the left and the right wanting less and less to be talking to each other, right? We're all kind of gathering in our own echo chambers on social media and see less and less of a need to reach out across the aisle to listen, I mean, truly listen to opposite views and the like, right? And frankly, I mean, as we all know, the public's resentment towards our wealth, our, you know, high incomes and luxurious lifestyle is feeding populism and, you know, problems, social problems around the world. You know, I was in a session in Davos when Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Tharman stunned the whole audience of about 100 central bankers, finance ministers, trade ministers, and the like, by arguing that, as technocrats, we've been so focused on macroeconomic policy, and we've really neglected what he called social policy, right? And again, look, for these economic growth rates, for capital markets and investing and private equity and hedge fund profit making, for all these things to continue to be able to exist for us, we have to earn back the public support, right? And the key to that actually is social policy. It's something that we in our hallowed, luxury bubbles often prefer not to think about. But again, I predict that the private equity and hedge fund and finance industry will not be able to escape this public demand. Much like the corporate sector is already having to, think much more about environmental impact and social impact and, their own culture inside their organizations. Non-discrimination, or what are you doing for quality of life, and the problems facing humanity. I predict the finance sector eventually will get dragged into this as well.